I am no stranger to competitive activities. In team sports, I only cared about being good enough to make the main roster, and in individual ones, even if I attended some tournaments, I was rarely that concerned about my performance. There was always the implicit assumption that I'd eventually get better if I kept showing up to training and learning something new. But I never really cared that much about how good I actually was. But then everything changed when I got back into fighting games. At the time of writing, I've been doing this for a little over 2.5 years, effectively starting from scratch, as in my previous stint with the genre, I had absolutely no clue what I was doing and I never tried to learn. Now, by most metrics, I am about average in most fighting games I play regularly, so there's been noticeable improvement since my early days. I was stuck on Silver in SF5, but made it to Plat 3 in SF6 before I dropped the game, and spent most of my time on floor 8 and 9 in Strive, having started at 4. In Granblue, I went from A ranks to S++, and in Tekken, I made it to Fujin before the Season 2 reset, when I thought I would be forever stuck in Orange. Granted, some of these promotions were the results of being carried by ranked matchmaking changes, but even without that, my win rate did go up over time. But in order to notice that, I had to take a deliberate step back. Because when I'm playing, it feels the same as it ever did, especially when the set ends in ON2. Or does it? I want to talk about why actual progress is hard to notice in fighting games. It might sound bleak, but stick around to find what we can do about it. We can start with the obvious. The goalposts are, in fact, moving. For the sake of illustration, I'm gonna be talking about online ranked, but the same applies to tournaments. When you rank up, the matchmaking system will start pitting you against stronger opponents than you are used to. This has several implications. To begin with, your opponents will be, on average, less susceptible to knowledge checks, especially if you're playing a popular character. So if you were relying on so-called scrubby strats to get to where you are, you might feel like you've just hit a wall. The other thing is that character pick rate tends to change at various points of the ladder, so not only you fight people with better fundies, but you might also be faced with matchups you have less experience with. Another quirk of ranked matchmaking is that the closer you get to the top, the wider the skill gap becomes within a given rank. I will probably leave that topic for another video, but in short, it's more or less a necessity in order to reduce matchmaking times, as the player base at a given rank tends to shrink as ranks go up. With all these factors, it's easy for imposter syndrome to set in and feel like your promotion was nothing but a fluke. But these things are out of our control, and even if it can feel annoying to have new obstacles on the road ahead of us, we must not forget that we actually got far enough up the ladder for these to become something to worry about. Our problem is that we tend to be bad at identifying and acknowledging how we have improved to the point we're currently at. I mean, experience is basically the answer, but not being more specific than that is part of the problem. In order to get past these new opponents, we're probably going to have to play differently, in one way or another. But if we start shaking things up without understanding what it is that we did right, we might end up dropping good habits. Well, sometimes focusing on something new might make other areas of our skill set suffer temporarily, and that's to be expected. But there's a difference between setting something aside and accidentally unlearn it. One thing is to be mindful of how far you've come and notice the little pieces of evidence that you are moving in the right direction. Compared to when you started, how often are you taking throws, landing anti-airs, hitting your corner combos, etc.? Noticing these small improvements will prove to you that all those hours you put into the game have had an effect. For instance, when I started playing Granblue Fantasy vs Rising and was asking for matches on a Discord server, I would get pulverized in the corner, hitting counter hit after counter hit. Now, even when I lose a set 0-10, I put up a fight. I even win rounds sometimes. But most importantly, I rarely feel overwhelmed even against masters, because I have a better understanding of what is happening, so I can reduce the number of bad decisions I make. That's the kind of improvement that can be tricky to notice, as it's easy to take for granted. One way to measure this is to make active, deliberate guesses as to what your opponent will do in a given situation over the course of a set. I've mentioned before that fighting games are about predicting the future, so practice doing that, and to force yourself to do it, say it out loud. Not just in your head. Something like, I bet they're gonna wake up throw here, or they're going to DP in my plus frames. Chances are, when you're starting out, or when you play an unfamiliar matchup, you'll be too busy trying not to die to even ask yourself those questions. But as you gain experience, you will start to find those pockets of time where you can start thinking about this. At that point, it doesn't really matter if you guess right. The fact that you have the brain space to do this is a sign that you are getting a better understanding of the pace of the game, or at the very least of this matchup. Before you start guessing right, you'll eventually find yourself in a position where you'll start understanding which of your opponent's options are even possible and which ones are likely. Or in fighting game parlance, you'll start to have your mental stack in order. But as usual, while some of this will be universal, some of it will be matchup specific, and some of it will even be opponent specific. So it's possible that one ranked set you'll be like, I understand it now, and the next you'll feel fucking lost. And since your ranked queue is composed of many different people, unless you're playing a game like Granblue, that's a lot of variables you can control for when trying to assess your own progress. A solution to that is then to bring consistency to your sessions in an environment that is lower stake than ranked. In other words, play longer sets against known opponents, whether it's in lobbies or at your locals. It's still valuable to ping the matchmaking role on your Discord server of choice, but in larger servers that isn't that different than hopping onto the casual match queue. The goal here is twofold. First, by playing the same people week after week, you'll get a much better sense of your own improvement, as it will be easier to see that you can now start to predict and eventually deal with your opponent's habits.
Oh, bro.
You're trying to round start super!
Yes.
Bear in mind though that they aren't a constant. They are also learning, and some people learn faster than others, so the skill gap might seem to remain unchanged, or even widen, despite your improvements. But that's where the second benefit comes in. Regular sparring partners will know how you fight, and assuming you're actually talking during the set, they will let you know when you're doing something right, even if it's a simple
nice catch.
And since they have been fighting you for a while, they will be able to tell you which aspect of your play has improved. Like, oh, your whiff punishing has become so good I can't YOLO in neutral anymore. They'll also be able to ask probing questions about changes in your habits, like, hey, I've noticed you rarely use this move anymore, how come? This kind of feedback is way more useful from someone who knows you than from a random person in a random server, because they know how familiar you are with the genre, the game, and the character, while randos have a tendency to overestimate how much you know. Which, to be fair, is better than being taken for a noob, but that's not as helpful as feedback pitched at the right level. So in a nutshell, find people you enjoy playing with, and play with them as regularly as your respective schedules allow. With this, and with some practice of mindfulness when playing in ranked, it'll be much easier to acknowledge your own improvement in a genre that is lacking great ways to communicate it to you.